For a while now, I've been in the habit of keeping track of my age in terms of days. We've even given sermons on that practice. I created a while ago a web page, a private web page just for myself. I used it for a few keywords of inspiration for myself and also keep track of my calendar. When I opened up that page this morning, it said, "Welcome to your 26,443rd day on this beautiful planet." And underneath it says, "This is the day our God has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it." As far as I'm concerned, every day that I have the privilege and the honor to walk on the surface of this beautiful planet is a joy and a blessing. The Roman philosopher Seneca wrote an essay called "On the Shortness of Life." In that essay, he says, life isn't short. If it seems short, you're not using your time wisely. I think to myself, over 26,000 days? What did I do with them all? I mean, life is long if we fully appreciate it. Be that as it may, I think there comes a time in our lives, really for anyone, but especially for those of us here who pretty much know for a fact that we're well into the second halves of our lives, there comes a moment when we need to say, I am not going to be walking on the surface of this beautiful planet forever. Very often when I say that, people are expecting I'm going to continue with them, talk about bucket lists. I'm not going to talk about bucket lists. I'm not going to be walking on the surface of this beautiful planet forever. Therefore, I am going to spend a significant amount of my time and energy encouraging and supporting those who are likely to be walking on the surface of this planet after I'm gone. To be sure, we don't necessarily leave this planet in the same order that we came. And there are people that, tragically, die way too young. Even so, I think there comes a moment in our lives when we think, what kind of planet do I want to leave behind? For those who are going to come afterwards, I am going to do my damnedest to help this planet to be, for those who come next, to be one where they can be really happy and joyful and grateful to live in. Our Bible readings are all about inheritance and who inherits. Abraham said, I have no heirs, it's going to go to my slave. In fact, eventually, Abraham, or later it became named Abraham, gave birth to Ishmael and to Israel, ancestor of the Jewish people. Ishmael, the ancestor of the Arabian people. Interestingly enough, are linguistically in a lot of ways actually related peoples. Judaism, Islam, Christianity, the Baha'i faith, all consider them in some ways to be the heirs of Abraham. In that parable of the rich fool, Jesus is not going to say, I'm not going to divide your family inheritance, and he tells this story It always cracks my sense of humor the way the guy talks to his soul and says, "Soul, I'm going to build some new barns and I'm going to relax." And the voice says, "Thou fool." And who is going to have what you have prepared for yourself? But actually, I think that is a good question. Who is going to have what we stir up for ourselves? I'm not against inheriting money, but remember, Jesus seems to think that's not the main thing. And he makes a distinction between the treasures we store up for ourselves and being rich toward God. And I think that reading from Swedenborg can elaborate on it a little. Every moment of our lives has consequences, and those consequences continue forever and ever and ever and ever. And those are good consequences. That's our richness toward God. What we're leaving behind is, in fact, our inheritance. It's our legacy. If you want to use that word, of course, from the Swedenborgian perspective, when we die, it's our bodies that die. And that inheritance kind of continues in two directions. Those consequences are what we're working from as our lives unfold in the spiritual world. They're also what's unfolding for those who are still walking on the surface of this beautiful planet. One of my great heroes for a long time has been Elizabeth Cady Stanton. If you're not familiar with that name, she lived mostly in the 19th century, died in 1902. She was one of the early activists for women's equality. She worked very closely with Susan B. Anthony on women's rights to vote. She had some very radical thoughts for her time. She thought that young girls should be able to go to the same schools as young boys, that young women should study at the same universities as young men, that women should be able to enter into any profession that was open to a man. She thought that a marriage should be between two equals. She thought that women should be able to manage their own finances, just like men do. None of that was a reality in her time. And even women's suffrage came long after she had passed into the spiritual world. What makes her such an inspiration for me is she worked hard and tirelessly and faithfully for a world she never got to live in. And I take that as inspiration for us. We can dedicate our lives for a world that we may not get to live in ourselves, and that is a noble thing to do. Some interesting details of her life. She came from a large, wealthy family with had lots of sons and daughters. Unfortunately, all of her brothers died young. And her father was preparing them for a career in law. And even though he gave her the best education a woman could have in those days, he actually said to you, "I wish you were a son, so you could pursue that career in law." Another amusing incident for me is when she married, let's see, I wrote the guy's name down. I can't read it. Mr. Stanton. He was a very powerful and outspoken abolitionist in the early 19th century. She decided she wasn't going to have obey in the wedding ceremony. Apparently, that was already left out in some Quaker services. She wasn't going to do obey. I remember one of the couples I married at Wayfarers Chapel. They told me they wanted to put obey into the ceremony. I'm like, I really, as a minister at Wayfarers Chapel, I really think, the vows for the husband and wife should be the same. The compromise we made was we put obey in both of the vows. How they obey each other in practice, I'm not quite sure how that works. But I do want to actually talk a little bit more about the complexity of history. In fact, it wasn't easy, it wasn't unambiguous, it wasn't like a straight line forward. There always were tensions, always like rights gained and rights lost. Again, that's part of the reality of committing ourselves to working for a future we want those to come after us to live in, a planet we'd love to have those to come after us live in. In fact, Elizabeth Cady Stinson and Susan B. Anthony, they were abolitionists. They were strong abolitionists. And after the Civil War, they expected the abolitionists, and in particularly the men, to advocate for the same equality and freedoms and right to vote for women. Of course, for the most part, that did not happen, and there was a lot of tension there, even to the point where Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony lobbied against the 14th and 15th Amendments. Those were the amendments that gave everybody, regardless of race or color or former servitude, the right to vote. And yet, the language of those amendments, every male American citizen over the age of 21 years old, regardless of race or color or former servitude, will have the right to vote. And they're like, this explicitly is denying women the right to vote. Needless to say, there was a lot of tension. And sometimes, I'm not going to even go into the details, sometimes the people that are your heroes, when you get into the nitty-gritty of history, will say things that you're like, I wish you hadn't said that. We'll make the decision like, I wish you hadn't done that. Our heroes, I don't know, for me, my heroes are no less heroes if they're not perfect by my standards. I mean, take them in their time, take their inspiration, don't follow their example blindly today. I've been reading a book. This is by Mary Ann Edgar Buddy, is the Episcopal Bishop of Washington, D.C. She wrote a book on how we learn to be brave. One of the chapters she talks about Thurman Marshall, a very powerful lawyer who won all kinds of civil rights cases that were brought to the Supreme Court. Later on, He became a Supreme Court justice. She writes also about a woman at the same period. Let's see. You can see I'm old enough to need notes for this stuff. Here we go. The Reverend Dr. Polly Murray, also a very powerful lawyer, also wrote about the history of rights for enslaved people, rights for black people in this country. But she was always in tension with the male leadership, that we need some women voices. She became the first black woman to be ordained as an Episcopalian priest. And it was a struggle. As Buddy continues the book, she's being very realistic. Rights gained can be lost again. And Justice Marshall on the Supreme Court eventually, as the court turned more conservative, started rolling back some of the protections. In the end of his life, he thought of himself as someone who just wrote all of the dissents to the Supreme Court decisions. The 1950s, the 1960s. Again, it was the same thing in the midst of the civil rights struggle of the 1950s and 60s. There were like women's voices saying, when are our contributions to this movement going to be recognized? When are our specific rights and equalities going to be spoken to? And the same things with LGBT people. When are our contributions to the movement going to be heard? When are our needs, our rights and freedoms and equalities going to be acknowledged? And that struggle continues even up until this day. I mean, certainly we've lived more into Elizabeth Cady Stanton's vision than she ever saw, but we're not 100% there yet. And, we're seeing the rights of trans people, rights that they had, being taken away. We have every reason to believe that there's going to be attempts to roll back the rights and freedoms of same-gender couples. That is on its way. I do have a quote I want to read from Reverend Buddy. If I can, I'm going to see if I can do it in my glow-in-the-dark version. Easier to read. Maybe not. There we go. Kindle. Dun, dun. She writes, deciding to start on a courageous journey has the effect of weaving our past experiences into a larger tapestry of meaning. Nothing is lost or wasted. We recognize that our efforts are beholden to those who went before us. From their perspective, our decision to start may in fact be a continuation of the work they began, or the realization in our lifetimes of what they could only imagine in their dreams. When we decide to start towards something that requires courage, we're often creating new possibilities for those who come after us. Our example may be the one to inspire others to turn toward their Jerusalem, whatever the path God has set before them. Every day, I am grateful for one more day of the privilege and the blessing and the grace of walking on the surface of this beautiful planet. And I am determined, much as I am able to work for a future on this planet, a planet that is beautiful and just and at peace. And I urge all of us, we're not going to be walking on the surface of this beautiful planet forever, to take some serious thought about what we're going to leave behind for those who come after us. And let us not be discouraged by setbacks, by uncertainties. Working towards that future is always a noble benefit, and it will be our way of expressing love toward God and neighbor. May the Lord so help us, and may one day everyone live in that world of beauty and justice and peace. May the Lord so guide us. Amen.